Tune in as we expose the raw reality of the intense exhaustion of parenting an autistic child that can feel all consuming. We dive into the common experiences of feeling overwhelmed, depleted, and running on fumes with a reminder that it's okay to simply be present with your child without trying to immediately strategize. But before we get started, don't forget to hit that notification bell for updates on our new streams. Let's get started. Hey, Embracers!
Welcome back.
So, speaking of like driving on fumes, I just realized I didn't even bother bringing my water. So, this will be an interesting stream.
Not to worry, Leah. I've got
Enough water for the
enough
both of
water for
us.
both of us.
Oh, baby shark. You stole your kid's cup.
I was
So,
tired. I couldn't
we
find one.
I know, right? We wanted to talk about a topic that is like super relevant to us right now. It's one of the reasons we've been struggling to even get this episode up. This week has been long and rough for us, and we are sleep deprived and running on fumes. So we just started thinking like we have talked about burnout, and we've talked a lot about basically how to focus on self care. But we haven't talked about how the reality sometimes is that you just can't. Sometimes either you can't or maybe you just don't want to. And sometimes you just want to kind of mentally check out for a little bit. And I just want to make sure that everyone listening out there doesn't feel like they have to do something at all times, that sometimes it's okay to simply check out. And today was a reminder because I feel like we're hitting that wall right now that, hey, sometimes it's okay to just be present in your kid's life and pull a bluey where you just like lie down on the floor and let them play around you. And what's that game called? They have some game where the
I'm
game
thinking
is that
of.
he just lies there. What's it
I'm thinking
called?
of. I don't know what that one is. I'm thinking of like the whale, where it's like the mom is like lying on the sofa and like the dad is like the boat or something, and
Yeah,
like,
it's just like the
yeah,
games where you lay motionless and you just let the
right,
kids play around you.
right. I know for me, I feel like sometimes if I'm not like doing something or trying to be proactive or doing something with the kids or running around while they're awake, I feel like I'm like kind of like failing them, or I feel like I'm coming up short when it comes to actually putting in the effort towards them. So I've been trying to like reflect on it and try and figure out like, okay, how can I still be like a good parent with the kids while not doing a bunch of things that are going to just drain my energy even more so, where it's basically just like you're constantly running on fumes, because lack of sleep, just kind of rolling one day into the next continuously, and then weekends are not a thing because you're up early and just keep rolling. So it's like a never ending like spiral or like snowball,
Yeah.
whatever
And then on the
metaphor.
weekends, you're just trying to catch up on everything you couldn't get to during the week because you're working, packing the kids for school, after school activities, all sorts of things. And it's just like this never ending cycle. I think that one of the things that I've noticed is it basically impacts kind of every aspect of your life. So, like, you get sleep deprived because you try to squeeze extra hours out of your day to try to get things done. So, like, you're watching them all day and then you basically get them to bed and then you're like, okay, how many more hours can I squeeze out of my day to try to get as much done as I can? So like for me, that comes in the form of like editing the podcast, or maybe I'm trying to fill out some healthcare paperwork for their Medicaid and things like that. Whereas for you, it's like you end up having to do like late night work because you have that like work schedule flexibility. So you end up being like a night owl.
Right. And I mean, sometimes like, I mean, I always kind of push that into like the background where it's like, okay, like when the kids are awake, I try to spend, we try, I mean, not just me, we try to spend as much time with the kids actually being present in their lives, because like that is a, I mean, family is a priority to us. I mean, not that like jobs aren't important because they keep us all alive, but like we kind of see family as a priority and kind of like work as like the filler of space around. So like when they're awake, I want to try and be with them as much as I can, which means obviously work kind of gets pushed to like the later nights. But honestly, I think it was last night, like I was typing up a report late at night and I had to actually cut short. I mean, by cut short, I guess like I logged off my computer at like 10:30, 11 o'clock, because I was falling asleep as I was like typing my reports. So I would like write a little bit and then I'd fall asleep and then I'd wake up and realize what I was typing and then I would start on the same sentence and then I'd start to fall asleep again, and it was like a repetitive cycle. And then so I just was like, okay, I'm not like gonna get any further. Like this is just like terrible quality. So I basically just kind of like closed the computer and then just like went to bed, which I mean is unfortunate because when you're going in a cycle where it's focusing on meeting the family needs and then meeting like work requirements, like you often sometimes don't feel like you just have a chance just to like sit down and just like relax, or like I mean even us having like a basic conversation sometimes even seems like a strain in itself.
Yeah, people always say like, I don't know how you run this podcast and Autism Wish and have a full-time job and have kids and go to their therapies. And I'm like, I don't know either. It just happens. I don't know how I do it because it really is kind of like crazy all the time. Like we have back to back to back stuff, but we do make sure that we build in some breaks on the weekends in particular. Like we basically reserve most of the weekend to be like, okay, let's go take the kids somewhere and just, even if it's do nothing, let's do nothing somewhere other than the house at least, because then you get a change of scenery and it feels vacation-y, even though it's just, I don't know, walking around Five Below, for example.
Well, it's funny. I think the comedian Louis C.K. I
Yeah.
think that's who it was. He was basically saying like when you have kids, basically like the vacation is like when everyone is packed in the car and you close your like wife's door, and the time it takes from you to walk from your wife's door over to like the driver's like, door and open it, that is your vacation that you go on when like the family is going on a vacation, just because of how crazy things generally are. So I mean I mean in like a joking way, of course, I kind of think of that as well, because like sometimes like when we go on a drive just anywhere, going on an errand with like the kids, sometimes when we're just in the car driving, if the kids are looking out the window or they're listening to music and like there's no screaming in the car, sometimes as I'm driving I'm like, this is our relaxation time. Just driving, doing errands is like relaxing for us, because like that's the only time we can kind of sit motionless of sorts and
Because they're
like
all
just
strapped in and they can't run
right,
anywhere.
right. Assuming there's like no screaming involved, but if it's relatively quiet in the car and we're just listening to music, just like driving, that is kind of like our like mini vacation, or our break from like the constant like craziness of like therapy or like work and like just dealing with everything that's kind of pulling us in every direction at once.
But now we can't even do that because our kids have grown wiser and they're listening into our conversations and they're interrupting us because they'll be like, hey, I want to listen to the music. Stop talking over it.
Right. Or they ask clarifying questions when we're having a conversation like,
Of our
oh,
personal private
can
conversation.
can you say that again? I didn't hear you. And it's like,
Here's the
there's a
microphone. Say
re
it louder.
there's there's a reason why you didn't hear it. It's an adult conversation.
Yeah, so now we
Uh,
have to be more careful because we're used to them not understanding what we were saying. And now that they've gone through so much therapy and everything, they're starting to really understand everything. So that's been like a new hurdle for us to get over. But one of the other things that a lot of people don't take into consideration is that that phrase of like running on fumes or driving on fumes means something very different to a special needs parent than it does the average parent. Like we have these additional things that we have to handle and deal with that neurotypical parents or parents of neurotypical kids or parents who don't have kids with any sort of disability don't have to worry about. And one of those things is, for example, the mental exhaustion of just having to constantly figure out how to best accommodate your child in every situation. So, specifically, for example, school, a person who doesn't have a special needs child doesn't mentally have to constantly be mindful of whether or not their needs are being met at school all the time. They can just pack their lunch, put their backpack on, send them out the door, and then what does every parent say? Like, oh, I get an 8 hour break. This is wonderful. Parents of special needs kids don't get that luxury. We're stressed and worried the whole time, hoping that school is going okay.
that's true. I feel like sometimes I feel like other parents who don't have that situation, they kind of think of like or go on like autopilot, where it's like some of these like repetitions, everything is kind of like the same as far as like getting the kids ready for school and kind of going out and getting that ready. I feel like the challenge is every day is like strangely unique. I mean, everything from like the food choice. So I mean, like obviously, like their foods are are relatively limited, but even so, even getting them to eat some of those limited foods are a challenge. Like for the last 2 or 3 days, like our oldest doesn't eat breakfast, so it's like trying to make sure like she's actually eating before she goes to school, trying to find something that she will be able to eat or willing to eat just because of the restrictive diet. But then also periodically, like we'll like check our phones, make sure like, okay, have any of the teachers messaged us, make sure everything's okay. Half the time our kids are getting in a fight because they have to alternate who gets on the bus first. And if for some reason the other one gets on the bus or says something mean to the other one as they're getting on the bus, that can tailspin them out of control a little bit as well. So I feel like there's so many things where it's kind of like you're constantly walking on eggshells to make sure that um, everyone is in kind of like a status quo or like a neutral place, that there's no like tipping of the scale in any direction.
Yeah, and a lot of that is normal when it comes to like sibling relationships and sibling rivalries. But the thing with autism is that you get extra seasoning on top of that. So, for example, our oldest kid has more of that PDA, pathological demand avoidance profile, where you have to really kind of manipulate the conversation in a way that will convince her to do something, because otherwise she kind of automatically doesn't want to if it's not really on her terms. And so that's where that whole fighting for the bus on who gets to be first goes. And we started coming up with methods to help accommodate that. And so what we've done, for example, is we've alternated days. So we're like, okay, you get Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. She gets Tuesdays and Thursdays. So every day we ask them, what day is it? Prepare them mentally, be like, okay, it's your turn to be first, or it's your turn to be second. So part of the problem with having a special needs kid and mental exhaustion is that you're having to constantly come up with these micro decisions all the time. You're having to constantly think about, okay, my kid is trying to eat dinner right now and they're struggling because this food is not the right texture, or it wasn't the right brand, or maybe you made it on a Tuesday and they only eat it on Wednesdays. And you have to take emotional energy to troubleshoot right then and there. And that's something that I feel like, yes, parents normally have to deal with that sort of thing, but I feel like when it comes to autism, it's kind of to a much higher degree. So it's like those are kind of like miniature micro things they have to deal with. We take that and then we like amplify it.
It's funny that you mentioned like wrong brand of food, because the one thing that comes to mind is, you know, that cinnamon bread, if it is not Pepperidge
Yeah.
Farm cinnamon bread, don't even bother. Just throw it in the trash. Like,
Yep.
they're not
It's
going to eat
the
it.
other ones are
It's,
gross.
and
I
then,
can
like
taste the difference.
Thomas or whatever the other brand is at the store.
Disgusting.
Yeah, so yeah, make sure you got those brands right, because heaven forbid you pick up that
Pepperidge
wrong
Farm, people, for those of you listening, because the same thing goes for the garlic bread. Only the Pepperidge Farm brand is good.
one. Oh my goodness! But heaven forbid you get the brand next to it by mistake, because it's the same color and same general food, same flavor. Yeah, no, it's just goes in the trash because no one eats it.
The good
apparently.
thing is, because I also have sensory issues, I serve as kind of like a screener. So I know that if I don't like something, my kids will probably not like it, because I tend to align on the brands that they like just naturally. So I can kind of try something and be like, I don't think they'll like this.
And then I always jokingly think of like, in an apocalypse, like I'm
We're
sorry,
done.
like
We're done.
you and the kids might not make it, because heaven forbid.
Well, I don't know. We
Pepperidge
all like
Farm-
fruits and veggies, but
I guess that's true. But heaven forbid Pepperidge Farm goes under and there's no cinnamon bread.
no carbs for us.
just the other knockoff brand, then that's it. So,
Yeah. But we wanted to bring all this up because a lot of times what happens is, and I mean, we've been guilty of this too, is we focus on trying to fix everything. And trying to fix things also takes up emotional, mental, and even physical energy. Like, you can be sleep deprived, that can physically drain you. And I wanted to just put this idea out there to you as parents and caregivers that you don't have to always be the fixer. You don't always have to make sure that everything is going 100% okay all the time. Like, we are still, as parents, human. Like, we still have our own weaknesses and our own personal needs. And as much as we as parents, especially I would say even as mothers, I know most of my listeners out there are mothers, we really have this like natural instinct to really want to protect our kids, to really want to be there for our kids, to really make things as easy and smooth as possible for them. And sometimes what ends up resulting from that is that we kind of overdo it. And I know that that's something I'm probably super guilty of, is just really overdoing everything. And it gets kind of addictive sometimes because there's high reward to it. The more you do for your kid, usually the more you get back. So, like, the more you're doing all the at home therapy recommendations, the more you're bringing them out to social groups, the more you're getting involved with the school to make sure they have the proper accommodations, the more you see your kid thriving. So there's like a direct reward mechanism. Like you get that dopamine hit, like, oh, this is working. But that doesn't necessarily mean you should do it all the time. And the reason I say that is because at the end of the day, if your kid grows up and you're this exhausted, beat down, medically fragile person because you didn't take care of yourself during all those years, who's that kid going to have in the future? Who's that kid going to basically be able to rely on if you're not going to be around because you didn't take care of yourself back when you were younger and had that youth and had the energy, or at least the access to the energy before we wasted it all?
And one of our greatest fears is essentially like we're not sure what happens to our kids after like we pass. So like obviously like in our later years we have to make sure like we have a plan in place to make sure like our kids are taken care of. So I mean like yeah, if we basically fall apart now and we're basically done for, like we can't get to that point because we don't have a backup plan or a next step. But yeah, I definitely feel like this sometimes where it's like you keep trying to do things almost to stay like active because you realize like if I sit down it's going to be such a challenge for me to keep moving on with the rest of the day. So if it's like 4:30 or whatever and we're exhausted and we're like okay, like we have to keep moving because we have to like make sure that the kids have dinner, we have to like clean up things, we have to make sure that like the baby's fed, all these different things kind of moving forward towards the later part of the day. If we sit down and just kind of rest at like 4:30, sometimes my fear is like oh my gosh, like it's going to be so much harder to get up and start getting all the other things set up for like the kids like bedtime and like the routine that we go through each night with stories and brushing and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, like if you're watching this episode live, you'll notice that we got on a few minutes late, a little more than a few minutes late. And that's the reason why, because we're just so like exhausted from the week. I mean, this week in particular was a pretty crazy week. And we were just like contemplating, we're like, should we just put this episode off till Saturday or not? And then we just decided was like, we'll just push through because this is a good topic to share with people because it is human, it is natural. And I think that sometimes what happens is we start comparing ourselves to other parents. And I know that I've heard from our listeners, like we've gotten feedback of like, oh, you guys are so great at this. Like, I don't know how you do it. And I feel like sometimes we might come off as like superhuman when we're not. So I want to make sure that you guys are also able to see like our flaws and see that we are like flawed individuals and that we do have struggles, because just because we don't mention them all and we're very optimistic doesn't mean they don't exist. So I want you guys to have a realistic, well-rounded perspective on what it's like to parent an autistic child. And while we're very like optimistic, I think realistically optimistic, we do have those struggles. And so the point that I want to drive with this episode is that sometimes it is okay to simply sit with that exhaustion for a bit, sit with the burnout for a little bit, and don't feel like you have to do anything. And when I say you don't have to do anything, I mean, remember that episode that we did about caregiver burnout? We gave all these tips on what you can do. I mean, don't even do that. Like, don't even bother to like get yourself a bubble bath, read a book, watch a movie. Like, just be present physically. Lay in your bed perfectly still and stare at the ceiling for all I care. Like, just whatever it is for you to just calm yourself and your body and be present. I think there was something we mentioned in another episode, probably the play therapy one, where it's like about grounding that our child learned through play therapy. And that's useful for parents too. Like if we're struggling with all that, just sitting down and just being like focused on the present and being like, okay, what's something that I see? What's something that I hear? What's something that I smell? And just like grounding yourself in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, most of the times I pass off me trying to recover a little bit is like I'll like sit down or lie down on the sofa, have a kids show on, and I'll have usually like the two older girls with me, and I'll basically just be like, "Hey, do you girls want to just like snuggle and just like watch TV?" And usually if it's a good TV show that they're both into, they'll be excited and they'll just like snuggle and we'll just like watch TV. Or like I'll make some popcorn and I'll like try and like get them excited. Oh, let's do like a movie night because I know, okay, at least for the movie night, at least that's like an hour or an hour and a half of just like resting, just like watching TV. I mean, I hate the idea of relying on TV or iPads or anything to kind of bridge the gap through the day. And I mean, obviously, it's important not to always rely on technology as a source of like raising your kids, but I do think it can be a time that you spend with your kids. So if you are snuggling watching a movie on a Friday night and eating popcorn, you can build a memory with them doing that. So then the kids think of like, oh, it's Friday night. Maybe we'll have pizza. Maybe we'll get popcorn and we can watch a different movie. So through their childhood, you can create a memory tradition of something to expect and look forward to through the rest of the week, even if during that time mom and dad are mostly putting that in place because it gives us a chance just to breathe and relax, not worry about what we're doing for dinner because Domino's, Pizza Hut, whoever we can find to make dinner has got it covered. And we can sit down and relax for hopefully an hour if we're lucky and there's no fights in between the movie.
Yeah. I think one thing that parents often struggle with, at least good parents, right, are the ones who feel a sense of guilt if they're not constantly catering towards that caregiving service. So oftentimes we really love our kids and we're trying our best for them. And I'm sure a lot of my listeners here are overachievers because you're listening to this podcast. If you're this far down in our podcast, you're committed because it's been multiple seasons now and you're still listening, which means you are one of those parents that is deeply involved in your autistic child's life and you're really concerned about their well-being. You're really interested in seeing how you can best help them in life. And that means that more than likely, you are one of those people that's like us, where sometimes we might end up doing a little bit too much. So, what comes with that sometimes is a side of guilt if you are not performing to the level that you normally do over time. So, we kind of set this unrealistic pattern of performance where we are, going to those meetings with teachers, we're taking them to the therapies, we're doing all these things. We set up this pattern of behavior over time. And once we get burnt out, which can take months or years, once you hit that wall, you don't realize like it's there because you were overdoing it. And instead you just feel guilty, like, why can't I do this anymore? I was able to do it before. Why can't I do it now? And I think that that's really why, because it's kind of like an illusion. You weren't ever really able to keep up that pace, but you just finally realized it.
And then I think for me, the biggest fear, and I mean, I see it pop up periodically with kind of exhaustion, and I think probably more the dads might fall into this category, is when you are absolutely exhausted and you're putting what you think your effort is as best you can towards the family and trying to take care of everything for the family, and you just are like, oh my gosh, like I can't even like just recover on my own. Sometimes you kind of are short tempered, you might lash out, you might get more like angry with little things that happen that overall it's not a huge deal if, okay, the kids made a mess, like I mean, our house is constantly trash one way or the other, so it's impossible to keep that clean. But if a mess happens, you might just be like a little bit more short tempered, responding, being like, oh, why did you spill that? Oh, you need to be more careful. And I find sometimes when I am like exhausted and feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm constantly trying to keep things moving and I can't make any progress because everything's kind of falling apart constantly, I do get a little bit more short tempered or a little bit more angry, and then sometimes I just have to take a break. Sometimes Leah will tell me to go to timeout. And
Yeah,
then
we did start doing
and
that for real.
I mean, honestly, I think the kids think it's funny too, because they'll, if mom says, "Oh, daddy needs to go to timeout," then even though I'm
Or do I?
frustrated,
I give you a choice. I'm like, do you want to go to timeout or do you need to take a break? Because that's what we do with with the kids
right. And
sometimes.
so like as like upset or like mad as I am in the moment just of being exhausted and like that happening, I'm like, okay, yeah, in the greater perspective, I can use a few minutes for a timeout. Thank goodness, though, we don't use the same scale that we do for the kids, because me sitting
Because you would
down
be
for,
there a long
oh my
time.
gosh, like 35 minutes just like sitting on the steps, I'd be like, oh my gosh, just
Remember when
like,
the kids said that? They were like, "You gotta be
right,
there for 35
right.
minutes."
We're
And I was
5 and
like,
we
"No,
have
I'll,
5
I'll
minutes
give
of
him
time.
a shorter one." Yeah, I was like, "It's his first one, so he gets to go shorter."
Right. I'm like, oh my gosh, 35 minutes of just sitting on the steps, like just hanging out.
Ugh, that would be. You just take a nap because you're exhausted. You probably
I mean, I
wish
get,
you could do that.
but on the stairs, you can't. Like, you can't lie down on the stairs. It'd
That's
just be
true.
like,
And you're a
it's
big,
like
you're a tall dude.
yeah, it's like a prison thing. You're just like stuck on the stairs. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, but that, I mean, that is true. Like, we've basically kind of like incorporated that with our family because the other thing is that throughout this entire process, though we are exhausted, we are still constantly present in the lives of our children and they are still constantly watching us and aware of what we say and what we do. So we have to be very conscious of how we respond to things, which is why I use that like timeout stuff because we're trying to model for the kids. So we do kind of like silly things for us as adults, basically because we're trying to get the kids to understand when they have to deal with like timeout or things like that. So we model it with us so that it's consistent. But yeah, I have noticed for sure that it does get harder to kind of organize and keep on top of all that the more exhausted you are. You just kind of want to be like, okay, I give up. Just kids, do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. But it's hard to keep on top of that when you're hitting that wall point.
But then like the worst thought ever is the idea of like, oh, we will do that tomorrow because tomorrow there's going to be more dishes in the sink. There's going to be more of a mess in the living room. Like their bedrooms
See,
are
I
just,
don't have that. I don't have that
oh my,
problem at all. I know you do. I know for you, you hate
oh,
postponing things till the next day, but like I don't at all because for me, I'm like I can tell when our family has hit that wall, and I'm just like, look, the dishes will be there tomorrow. The mess will be there tomorrow. We have the rest of our lives to clean it. We only have right now to decompress, basically, because the way I see it is like when you are exhausted and overwhelmed, there's like a refractory period. So it's not just that you have to take a break, it's like you have to take a break that is equivalent to the amount of time that you have basically spent being exhausted. Like you have to proportionally address that. Otherwise, you just go straight back. Like it's not really truly relief. So that's why I feel like sometimes it's worth postponing cleaning and things like that for your mental health.
that's true. But like, oh my gosh, like
You
there's
just hate it.
it, but it like never ends though, and that's the problem. It's like yeah, like you push it off tomorrow, and then it's like, okay, there's a bigger mess tomorrow to tackle, which requires more energy than if you try and break it up. But obviously, breaking it up is extremely challenging because every day there's a therapy, there's a social group or something that like we bring the kids to. So it's a constant jug, and then of course work. It seems like work is always like on the
Oh
back
yeah, we have to
burner.
do work. I
Right,
forgot. That's
and
a thing.
and I think I mean people are probably annoyed that we like always mention that, but like it is true because we do have the podcast and like the website and Autism Wish and all that, but the idea is like this is just like a like pet project that we do. Like this does not provide any type of like financial means of support for anything. Like this is just like a in a
We
way
lose
like
money.
right. That's the
Yeah.
most direct way to say it. But it's like a expensive hobby that also takes time to spend and create and turn out different episodes. But it's still important at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
it's
Because there's
just yeah.
because there's different ways of like filling your bucket. Like we've talked about filling your bucket, and there's like ways you can literally like physically fill your like financial bucket, for example, by working and making money. But there's ways to like emotionally fill your bucket. And I feel like for us, that's what Autism Wish and the podcast and everything is. It's like there's different ways people get re-energized. So if you're exhausted and you're fatigued and you're just like overwhelmed, sometimes the person may be physically exhausted. And so what works for them to energize them is literally a nap, like going to sleep. But sometimes it's an emotional exhaustion. And the reason you're burnt out is because you're mentally tapped from expending all of your mental energy on parenting and advocating for your child and arguing with people in public who are judging your kid for having meltdowns and not understanding autism, or trying to emotionally support your child who was just bullied for being autistic, things like that. And in those cases, that's more of an emotional psychological depletion. So you can fill that with an emotional psychological reward, which to us is the podcast in Autism Wish. So even though it is technically work, it is a way that we also fill our buckets.
Well, it is kind of like a, don't want to say like a therapy session, but it is kind of like, in a way, like a chance for us to actually talk about like our thoughts as it relates to our family while focusing on each other as far as how we are perceiving each other and ourselves in kind of the relationship and the family. So in a way, it is kind of like, I mean, therapeutic of sorts. Yeah, I definitely am a nap person. Like, oh my gosh, like a nap would be fantastic. Right now,
You're so good at it too. You could just like drop and nap. I cannot do that.
Do you know what the thought I just had right now?
Don't nap live on the podcast, please.
No, but remember like 8 years ago when we were married but didn't have kids yet, and you used to wake me up really, really early just to say hi.
That's awake, so I'm awake.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking about that more recently, and I'm like, why didn't she just let me sleep?
I was preparing you for children. You're welcome.
Yeah. So yeah, that's I love sleep.
Yeah. So I guess the moral of the story is parenting an autistic kid is definitely draining and exhausting. And I know that we've talked about the importance of basically self-care, but we wanted to make sure that you knew that we're fully aware and understand and acknowledge that sometimes self-care is not possible, or you're just too exhausted to even do that. And that's okay. Shutting down for a little bit here and there, that's fine. If that's what you got to do, then that's what you got to do. You just got to do whatever it takes to kind of reboot and have that energy to keep going afterwards. So if that means that you need to take some space, go to like a nice comforting space, whatever that may be, and do your thing, then that's totally okay. We as parents need to be able to acknowledge that we're exhausted, acknowledge that we're overwhelmed, and don't feel ashamed of it. Don't feel like you have to hide it from your partner. Don't feel like you have to hide it from the public. Just tell people like, hey, can you do this for me today? And you say, you know what? I can't. I'm like burnt out right now. I need 5 minutes to myself, 5 hours, whatever it may be. But just make sure that you do put yourself first sometimes, because that's often left for last.
Yeah, even a race car needs to take a pit stop every now and then to get new tires and gas.
Because if you don't, you're going to bust a tire on the track and then you're too late. You can't go and change it. You're done.
So take that pit stop.
Maybe that's the name, right? The name of the episode. Take that pit stop. So thanks for joining us today. Please let us know, have you hit that exhaustion point where you just feel like you're totally running on fumes? What works for you, or maybe hasn't worked as well for you during those moments? Let us know by joining the conversation in the Embracing Autism community, or by leaving us a comment on YouTube and Facebook at Autism Wish. Until next time, bye.
Bye.